I sat down, what, 30 seconds ago, and you're just seeing me walk on screen. Gotta love that YouTube time delay. But welcome to another Band Nerd Hangout. Um, just been coming off of a lively discussion in the Discord server, where we continue the Band Nerd Hangout all week long for Patreon members. So hello Ratchet, yeah, hello Mine. Ratchet and Mine have been in the Discord server all day. Hello Ryan, hello Sean. My volume is low. Okay, let's see if I can fix that. Um, let's do some checking real quick. How about I just bring the microphone closer? I'll be hopping in and out, currently cooking a pizza. Very quiet. Okay, let's see. Let me know if moving the mic closer helps. Audio. Devices. Oh, that should be right. Yeah, is audio better now? Still kind of quiet. All right, let's just turn up the volume then. Okay. Are we any better now? I'm not sure why the audio is coming through poorly. I have not adjusted anything. But, all right, is that better? It's hard to adjust volume when there's that 30-second lag. YouTube. But anyway, if I get confirmation that the volume is better, we can go ahead and proceed. All right. Okay. Well, I'm good now. So Ryan says I'm good. I'll wait to hear if Ratchet or Jared say that it's better because they were having issues. Okay, good. Still kind of quiet. Well, I mean, I've got everything turned up. 50% louder. Okay, that's very odd. Tell you what, let me try something real quick. Test, test, test. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, maybe that will come through better. I redid the microphone on there. Um, volume mixer. Let me know if that gets any better, and I'll move the mic a little closer. Uh, so the question was asked, which has a better sound set, Sibelius or Finale? Yeah, the answer is Note Performer. Note Performer is an add-on. It was developed for Sibelius, but it's now able to work with Finale and Dorico. And it is far superior than anything native to Sibelius or Finale. That's what I use by default now, and you can get it on basically a rent to own basis for like $10 a month, and you pay that for a year. You're done. You're covered, and you've got a really good sound system. What would you do if you were commissioned to write a piece entirely for synths? Um, um, I don't know. I don't think I would be the person that someone would commission something for synths for. Typically, when I get commissions, it's for wind instruments or the like. That it's that okay. Mine. That's weird. That it's not. It's not coming through as normal. I have not changed anything, so I can't really comment on that. That's very very odd. Audio properties. Okay, is this? What I'm going to do is I'm going to. I've adjusted some more internal things on the mic. Could the mic volume have been changed by Discord? Not that I'm aware of. It's an external mic, so it's going through a different program than the Discord. All right. So, how's Dorico? I've never used Dorico. I know people who do use Dorico. Okay. That is so weird that some of you are getting the sound and some are not. Let me figure out what's going on here. Audio. So I've got my microphone and my volume maxed out, and it's not doing anything. Stream health, view analytics, edit to line 9, close caption 9. Advanced audio properties. Okay, are we coming through more now? Um, we're the mic I'm using is a Blue Yeti. So I'm not going to be able to comment, Ryan, on any kind of libraries. I am not a sound engineer on that. What we're going to be talking mostly about electronic instruments. So I don't know what a pad is, Ratchet. You know what? I'm going to do something real quick. All right, I eliminated one of the variables. I had my heater going, so I have turned that off, and I'll just sit here and suffer in cold. And that was putting out a lot of noise, and I bet that could have been the problem. So let me know if that fixed it. Yeah. Anyway, so if I get any more comments on sound, I will try and adjust it as we go along. But I'm going to work on that. But okay, so the topic tonight is electronic instruments. This is not to be confused with electric instruments. So these are two different categories. An electric instrument is an electric instrument is an instrument that produces sound via normal acoustical means, but is amplified through some means. So, a great example of this is the electric guitar. Its sounds are produced by the strings of the instrument. An electronic instrument, on the other hand, produces all of its sounds electronically. So there's no actual sound producing unit other than, ones and zeros, or in the case of early instruments, through vacuum tubes and radio frequencies and that sort of thing. Okay, so yes, it does seem that the theremin right now is kind of the topic that people want to delve into. So let's go there. Theremin is one of the earliest electronic instruments. It was developed by Lev Termin in Russia, who later would anglicize his name as Leon Theremin, and he was a Russian electrical engineer. And what he found is that by moving parts of radios back and forth, he could create a pure sine tone. And what he did is just created an instrument that you would manipulate the radio field, the electric field around the instrument in such a way that you can change the pitch and the volume. So the right hand changes the pitch, while the left hand changes the volume, and you never touch the instrument. You got to see Carolina Ike recently. Yeah, she is absolutely magical, and oh my god, do I have like this biggest internet crush on her because she's absolutely adorable. And super talented. Ryan, we will get to how to score for Theremin in just a moment. I have a lot of experience with synths, including modular synths and some other electronic techniques down to a little tape splicing, but that's been in the pop and DIY idioms, not classical or art music or whatever we call it. I don't know what to call it. Nobody knows what to call it. It's classical music, works fine. But anyway, so yeah, the theremin was the first of the really accepted electronic instruments. The first great virtuoso was a lady by the name of Clara Rockmore, and she would tour around the country performing on the theremin, and was very well known for playing Saint-Saëns' The Swan on it, and so that's kind of become a familiar sound on the theremin. It was started being used in movies. The earliest movie that it was used in was, I believe, Bernard Herrmann's score to Spellbound. And Spellbound was an Alfred Hitchcock movie, but there was one scene in the movie that Hitchcock did not direct. And that scene was directed by none other than Salvador Dali. So you have a Salvador Dali, Alfred Hitchcock collaboration. And in the Dali scene, they used theremin. So just this really wild and bizarre thing. But I think most of us know the sound of a theremin from its use in sci-fi movies and a lot of, you'll see it in horror stuff. The creative tape manipulation began in classical academia, but was really put to use by the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. When was Spellbound? It was early 50s. Yes, the BBC Radiophonic Workshop does not get enough credit from music historians. The first widespread piece of musique concrète. Musique concrète is music that is it is not produced by instruments. It's music that is produced entirely by electronic means. And some of the early pioneers of it were people like Karlheinz Stockhausen and Edgar Varese. But the first piece of music, of musique concrète that that became widely known and people could relate to was the theme song to Doctor Who, 1963. And so, yeah, Doctor Who is historically extremely important. I think the first music to use all electronic music was Forbidden Planet, which was 1953. That sounds about right. Yeah. Who taught... I don't know a lot of the original early artists. Usachevsky is one who taught Wendy Carlos. Yeah, so once we break the 1950 barrier, electronic music takes off. Ratchet, Ferrari's a car. There's a movie out about him, Ferrari versus Ford. I don't know if I'd say Doctor Who is important, but it sure is fun. The Doctor Who theme was Delia Derbyshire, who specifically at the Radiophonic Workshop. Yes, unsung hero of composition, one of those great female composers that we don't talk enough about. And I want to do more focus on some great female composers, but that's going to be down the road at some point. But anyway, so yeah, back to the theremin. The theremin proves to be very, very difficult to play because you don't touch it. Everything on it is relative. Delia Derbyshire's work for them is more enjoyable to listen to than a lot of the music made with similar techniques. Absolutely correct. And if you want to make a technique popular, a technique accessible, you first have to make it enjoyable. And that was the thing that people like Stockhausen and Varese didn't do. They did not make the music enjoyable. It was effects. And it may have been what they could do at the time, but Delia Derbyshire took it and made melodies, made something memorable, made something that people love. Because, I mean, Doctor Who fans love the theme song. Yeah, so back to the theremin. Having no tactile feedback, as Sweeter says, it is absolutely terrifying. So there came about another instrument that would reproduce the theremin's sound and sound just like a theremin, do everything it needed, but it would have a keyboard. And it would make things a lot easier. All right. Would you compare the theremin to playing a slide trombone? No. Because on the trombone, you still have a place to put things. You're physically touching the instrument. Theremin, you're not even touching the instrument. I don't think anybody actually genuinely likes Stockhausen. I don't even think Stockhausen liked Stockhausen. He was there and people loved that he was doing this weird stuff. And I think they liked it more because it was weird, not because it was good. So I don't know there. But anyway, so uh, we we have in France the cellist Maurice Martineau uh, came along and said, "Well, this theremin is a great idea, but it's so hard to play because you don't know where to put the notes." And so he spent basically the rest of his life developing an instrument called the Ondes Martonots, which means Martineau's waves. And it took the ideas of the theremin and made them so much easier to use because it put a keyboard on there. And it becomes a much, much more complex instrument. The Ondes Martineau is one of those mysterious instruments that is very, very difficult to understand because there are so few of them. The true Ondes Martineaux were all made by Maurice Martineau himself. And they stopped production on that when he died in, I believe, 1988. And no one's really been able to fully recreate what he did since. So it becomes very difficult, and some of the instruments are no longer working. And I think only about 350 were produced. They don't come up for sale often, if at all, because the people who have them hold on to them, and they use them. There have been in the recent last 10 years, maybe, some companies who are trying to recreate the Ondes Martineau. Yes, so the unique speakers of the Ondes Martineau. So one of the interesting things that makes the Ondes Martineau so cool is that it comes with 3 speakers. Now, one of them is just your normal loudspeaker, like you take any kind of speaker. That's nothing special. The next one has a metal gong placed over the front of it, and this was called the métallique. And so everything would get diffused through the gong. So you'd have this wonderful shimmer on the sound. The third speaker was called the palm. And the palm had wire coils going over the front of the speaker. And those coils acted like sympathetic strings. And so they would vibrate. And again, another kind of shimmer effect. And as Sweeter says, these are essentially, they're like what modern guitar players use as pedal effects, except these were pedals. You just routed it through a different speaker, and lo and behold, you get this new effect. And great composers could take these and use them for particular sounds. So these 2 instruments together kind of form a really important pair. What the heck is a trautonium? I'm not sure anybody can fully explain what a trautonium is. It was... They were massive beasts. I believe it's something out of the Jurassic era. Hindemith wrote for it, and that's about it. I believe the trautonium may have been room size. So like the first ENIAC computers. And because it was so big, it just proved to be impractical. There was a time when there was a trautonium that was hooked up, I believe, to the New York telephone system. And you would call in to the New York trautonium and on your phone line, and it would play music through the phone. And this is back in like the 20s or 30s. The only thing I know about it, Hindemith wrote a piece for 3 of them. Will basic waveforms like square, triangle, and sine waves be included? Tonight, probably, but I mean that's more physics than actual instruments. Yes. Radiohead did get a hold of one. Johnny Greenwood has one. He was able to get one, and it has become one of his signature instruments. Um, Messiaen was a champion of it. Yes. Um, we need to talk about some composers who are using these things. And Olivier Messiaen is kind of like the king of Ondes Martineau usage. Interestingly, you don't find a lot of pieces actually written for Theremin. Um, partly this could be because Lev Terman himself disappeared for a while. We thought for many decades, that he had been sent to the Siberian prison camps or even killed during the Stalinist regime. But he turned up one day, and so he was never able to really promote his instrument. People like Clara Rockmore did that for him. But with Martineau, he was able to promote his instrument to the great French composers of the day. So composers like Messiaen or Jolivet or Arthur Honegger would be able to really take a hold of this instrument. I think this is one of those instruments. Had Maurice Ravel lived another 10, 15 years, he probably would have started writing for it. And I think if Ravel had been writing for it, we would probably see more Ondes Martineau than we do today. Yes, everybody keeps mentioning Turanga Leela, which I happen to have the full score of right here. This is a massive score. I absolutely adore this piece. Turanga Leela premiered in about 1949 by Olivier Messiaen. It's for large orchestra with a piano soloist and an Ondes Martineau soloist. And the Ondes Martineau part is really, I think, in this piece, kind of fascinating. There are times when you don't know it's there, that all of a sudden, just out of the blue, you hear this soaring line or a big sweeping glissando. You can follow the Ondes Martineau part, and it is a great blender. It will just seamlessly go in and, blend with everything. But there are times, if he has the right setting on it, it comes through crystal clear. Turanga Leela is very, very specific in his scoring for the Ondes Martineau. There was a time where the publisher used to put the manuscript of Turanga Leela in the window. I'd probably be Durand. We may have only gotten someone like Clara Rockmore because of the circumstances of her losing her bow hand. We wouldn't have hardly any examples of it outside Shockley horror film tracks. Interestingly, Clara Rockmore never did any of those film scores. She turned those down, and that went to somebody else. Mine, yes. Okay. You just now got the Futurama reference. Okay. So there is a huge, nerdy Futurama reference in the name of this symphony. This symphony is the Turanga Leela Symphony. And one of the main characters' names is Leela. And you don't find out until near the end of the third season that her first name is Turanga. And I do not know who on the writer's staff came up with that, but it is a deep, deep, nerdy cut. Okay, so let me talk about what Messiaen is doing here in the scoring. So, he writes the notes he wants, just like you do on any other instrument. By the way, the Ondes Martineau is monophonic. Same with the Theremin. They can only play one note at a time. So despite having a full 5-octave keyboard, the Ondes can only play one note. So the very first scoring marking here is ruban. So there's two ways of playing the ons. One is on the keyboard, and the other was by means of a ribbon. So the ribbon, you could slide up and down, and the ribbon is how you would imitate what the theremin does, the sliding all over. As, just like you would on a trombone or, well, really just the trombone. And so he says, play this on the ribbon, and then the metallic amplify. So the metal amplifier. So this would be the gong. And then he tells exactly which settings to put it on. And so I have a reference chart here. So the very first opening is M4321. I've got a reference chart here. Let's see what M4321 setting would be. So M. Of course, it would be in French, wouldn't it? And I don't read the French. But anyway, so he's absolutely programming in exactly the sounds he wants, and in this way, Messiaen's training as an organist comes through, and he's basically using this as organ registration, and he will change this throughout. And I'm trying to see Ruban. OCA, and I would have to look up what OCA means. But anyway, that's you don't want to see me looking at a score. We have to talk about FM synthesis before we talk about modern synths. Ratchet, you'll have to talk about FM synthesis because I don't know anything about it. This is where my personal knowledge starts failing me, is when we get into stuff like FM synthesis and music production stuff. Big ribbon controllers are very pleasant to use for parameters besides pitch too. I want to get or make one eventually. Yeah, and so you can see ribbon controllers starting to show up on synthesizers too. One thing about the Ondes Martineau keyboard is one, it's a floating keyboard. So you can wiggle it back and forth, and every time you press a key, you can actually make a vibrato on it. The other is it's much smaller of a keyboard than on a piano or an organ. So maybe a piano's key is an inch wide. The Ondes Martineau may be 3/4 of an inch wide. Ryan, I saw your message. Yeah, go listen to Turanga Leela. Yeah, it's fantastic. But stay here till the end. But then your listening assignment is Turanga Leela. But so interestingly, if composers wanted to write harmony for the Ondes, they had to write for a second Ondes. And so you will see in a few times, the composers will ask for 3 Ondes Martineau. And this makes me wonder if with today's technology, if a modern instrument were made, would it be such that it would produce it could produce harmony? And I don't know. Maybe it should just stay as a pure monophonic instrument. It would be interesting to find that out, though. But anyway, yeah. So true Ondes Martineau have not been made in over 30 years now. But there are, Turanga Leela gets played all the time because it's become just so popular. It's a great orchestra showpiece. Is the Ondes the first example of electronic monophonic keyboard instrument? Maybe. The Trautonium might be. It might be. I honestly don't know. The Ondes is from the 30s. The Trautonium, I think, was in the 20s. So that's just there's some dates there that are murky. Uh, so I'm trying to think if either the theremin or the Ondes Martonots has ever been used in a wind band setting to keep it on track with, us being band nerds. And to my knowledge, the answer is no. Messiaen wrote a few pieces that we can consider wind band pieces. But in neither of those did he use the Ondes. Really, the Ondes is most well known from Turanga Leela, and he did seem to kind of move away from it as he progressed. There's a choral piece that uses it. There's some solo stuff, but you don't see Messiaen using Ondes much past Turanga Leela. He uses it quite a bit in St. Francis of Assisi, but that piece is so enormous that it's hard to talk about. And that's one of those, I'll need to sit down sometime and listen to the whole thing. Massive woodwind section. But anyway, yeah. There was this, so the Ondes craze was really big in the late 30s into the 40s and into the 50s. And past that, you don't see a lot of the composers really writing for it. And I'm not fully sure why. It could be that modern synthesizers were coming onto the stage at that point. So you get your modern synthesizers coming on in the very late 60s. And so I think this would be a good transition into synthesizers. Earliest synthesizers were kind of like the Trautonium, being room-sized instruments. According to Wikipedia, the internet's most reliable source, the Ondes was invented before the Trautonium. Entirely possible. I am not going to make any... I'm not going to make any claims there, but I bet they're within like 5 years of each other. And you do have to realize that the very first Ondes made didn't actually have a keyboard. The keyboard was just painted on. The keyboard was a later addition. So you can find some early Ondes without a keyboard, but the keys are just kind of painted on there. And you did everything with the ribbon. So it could be that the Trautonium had the keyboard first, but the Ondes was an earlier instrument. So there's that. But anyway, so synthesizers, we start getting them around the 60s. There may be a few in the late 50s. And the first ones are just massive instruments that are... just too difficult to deal with, really. And it's not until you get to Moog. And somebody remind me what Moog's first name is. Robert Moog. The first synths were patched together with surplus scientific test equipment and radio gear, not capable of playing in a Western tempered scale or anything. Yeah. So we don't get really a usable Moog instrument, a usable synthesizer, until sometime in the 60s, when a guy comes along by the name of Walter Carlos. And I'm using that name at this point specifically. I know that there is a name change, and I will address that. Walter Carlos comes out with an album called Switched on Bach. And it becomes an immediate success. I mean, this is like one of the number one albums of the year. Not just classical, but all of them. And it is Bach played on a Moog synthesizer. Now, the reason I say the name change, Walter changes his name and comes out as being transgendered and now goes by Wendy Carlos, which is the name that we should refer to her as. In so doing, she becomes one of the first, really the most prominent of the transgender composers that we have. Wendy Carlos is also very well known for her work with Stanley Kubrick, who again helps to promote the this new electronic music. And her work is very prominent in the movie Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and I'm trying to think what else she worked on him with. I believe she did she help out some with 2001? I can't remember, but I know her work is very, very prominent in The Shining. Okay, so I've missed a few things. Thoughts on Isao Tomita? I've listened to Tomita's Planets a couple times. First time I heard it was back when I was in like 7th grade. It was actually the first time I'd ever heard the Planets was Tomita's version, and it was on an old documentary narrated by Patrick Stewart, and the I was blown away when at the end of it they played Holst's original Planets. Like, oh, this is far better. So I've never thought much about Tomita. RCA purpose-built synthesizer in the late 50s, I think. Yeah, it was Moog's idea to include a keyboard to make it accessible. You kind of needed that keyboard because before it was just moving things around and programming, and nobody wanted it. Bratchett's right. It is the best-selling classical album of all time. My parents have a copy. I listened to it as a kid. I don't know what schlemp means. 2001: A Space Odyssey. Yeah, and Clockwork Orange, Tron, The Shining. Yeah, so all these great synth scores were Wendy Carlos on a Moog synthesizer. She later on she made advances with digital synthesis and her own scale systems that didn't have octave equivalents. And again, all that stuff was made possible through her use of the synthesizer, this pure electronic instrument that we take for granted nowadays because it's like, oh yeah, it's just a synthesizer, right? And most of the time, what we use a synthesizer for is reproduction of a standard instrument. So you'll see, oh yeah, we got it. Our keyboard sounds like a piano, or our keyboard sounds like a harpsichord or an organ. But the original synthesizers, everything was done through additive synthesis. And correct me if I'm wrong on that. There is a fascinating documentary you can find with Wendy Carlos talking about how to get a xylophone sound on the Moog synthesizer, and she's going through all of these different parameters of what to do, what to add in, the attack and the sustain, and all these kind of ideas really come out of the synthesizer. And it's very fascinating what she's doing with it. And she shapes how the instrument gets used. And from there, it gets taken on by a large part by rock bands. And you'll see synthesizers get used. Man, is it the sound of 80s pop music or what? I mean, you go hear an 80s pop band and it's synthesizer everywhere. It's crazy, and these are all Moogs or descendants of the Moog synthesizer. Is composing an electronic piece just intonation something you can see you or someone else doing? I wouldn't have any interest in doing it. That kind of intonation stuff. I have never had any interest in whatsoever. I've got friends who are all into intonalism, but for me, it's not something my ears pick up on. I don't hear those subtle differences in tone. Thoughts on Paul Lansky? I have never heard of Paul Lansky, Ratchet. So again, that you're starting to expose some of my weakness areas. What's interesting with synthesizers is as we have progressed from the 60s, it seems that synthesizers have actually gotten kind of dumbed down, and they don't do what they did before. And everything is running now off of MIDI. And I would love to go back and have um, um, a true, like Moog synthesizer where you could do everything on it and set everything. Okay, Ratchet, thanks. Yeah, I'll look for it. On the West Coast, there was another school of synth building from Moog Subtractive. For the experimental music of the 60s, there's Buchla and Surge are the makers, touch plates instead of keyboards. That's going to be weird. I bet those didn't take off because keyboard is so familiar. Okay, so Sneck was asking, and this is actually something that we really probably should have um, talked about. Thoughts on the theremin as an orchestral instrument or in any other context? So, um, the okay, so the theremin as an orchestra instrument or a potential orchestral instrument. The problem with it is finding players who can play it. It is extremely um, difficult to play. But once you find the players who can do it, absolutely. Carolina Ike, I think, just premiered a new theremin concerto. Uh, One of the things about the theremin is it is it needs to be there as a soloist, and you can use it as a soloist perfectly fine. It's not going to do a lot of this great blending, and one of its drawbacks is its lack of pitch accuracy and its lack of clean articulations. There's no such thing as a clean articulation on a theremin, which is why the Ondes Martineau became so much more popular, because the Ondes Martineau had a clear attack it could do. Okay. So that's partly why the Ondes Martineau was more successful as an orchestral instrument. It's easier to play and it can do more stuff. The theremin is a simpler instrument, but the simpler the instrument, oftentimes what you'll find is the harder it is to play. Okay. And okay. Ratchet says FM synthesis was a massive breakthrough of the DX7. Okay, Ratchet, you're going to have to explain what the DX7 is. I've heard about it. I'm not fully sure what the DX7 is. And I assume that was a model of synthesizer, but um, so you'll have to explain. Yeah, it's truly a miracle for the right person to find their way to the theremin. Yeah, and you only have really a handful of people worldwide who are really what we could call theremin virtuosos. Oddly enough, a friend of mine that I went to school with, her brother turned out to be a theremin virtuoso. So, how does one score for electronic instruments? Um, very carefully. So, if you want, find a score to Turanga Leela, and um, this will show you how to score for the Ondes Martineau. So that was the first really successful instrument to use in the orchestra. The theremin you can do. The theremin, another one of its issues is it doesn't have a well-defined range. Depending on the settings you can put on it, it will have different ranges. So, now, talking about the synthesizer is a little different. Synthesizers actually get more difficult to score for, largely because they're all a little bit different. So if you're using a Yamaha or a Moog or a Korg or whatever, that you'll have different settings on all of them. But case in point, John Adams, in his scoring Short Ride in a Fast Machine, has part for 2 synthesizers. And he says, in fact, let me go grab a book real quick. All right, so this is Alfred Blatter's Instrumentation and Orchestration, and it is by far my favorite modern orchestration and instrumentation textbook. And it's clear, it's concise, and it covers everything. It's I find it much easier to use than the Adler. It's just be a great thing to find in your library. Okay, so I gotta find where he talks about John Adams. Synthesizer. Okay, synthesizer. Okay, so these are the footnote. This is from the footnotes of John Adams' Short Ride in a Fast Machine. Oh, Ratchet, the book is Instrumentation and Orchestration by Alfred Blatter. So what he says is synthesizer. The sound should be similar to an analog brass voice with a moderately fast attack. For example, the Ana Brass preset on the Yamaha SY77. The speakers should be placed directly behind the players. The sound should never be mixed into the auditorium. The level should be adjusted to mix with the rest of the orchestra and not predominate. The synthesizer parts are optional. And that's John Adams' directions in Short Ride in a Fast Machine. My guess is you're not ever going to hear the synthesizers play because he then goes and says these parts are optional. But he has to specify down to the model that he's using what sound he wants. And that becomes very difficult for a composer. And it's one reason that I have never ventured into composing for synthesizers. Because there are so many different presets, you would have, I think, composing for a synthesizer would be akin to the level of skill you'd need to composing for organ. Now, I write for organ, but there are so many, standard organ works that you can go and study. And you know automatically that every single organ ever built is different from one another. They're built into the room. And so you'd need to have a level of familiarity with the synthesizer as you would with an organ, with the amount of stops you can use. And in theory, the synthesizer has an infinite number of sounds it can do. And it's almost overwhelming to me what they can do. Also, Adams uses synths in a lot of pieces. Violin Concerto, Short Ride in a Fast Machine, The Dharma at Big Sur. When was it composed? 1984 is the copyright date on it. That time, there was a time when that kind of analog sound wasn't on a lot of commonly available synths, but they are now. Oh, wait, 86. I'm looking at the copyright on a different piece. And what is that from? Oh, Interesting. So Bladder, for some reason, includes an excerpt from a piece by Sam Adler, who is his competitor, basically. Do I have enough knowledge of Hammond organs? The Hammond B3. I have a minimal amount of knowledge of the Hammonds. Hammonds are interesting. They're really closer to being actually an electric instrument instead of an electronic instrument, because there actually is something inside of them doing the vibrating. No, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of the Rhodes organ, the Rhodes piano, aren't I? I had a chance to buy a Hammond organ a few weeks ago, and I didn't. It was the same estate sale. I could have bought a Steinway piano for $150. It was late 80s. Was when the digital preset synths were everywhere and Moogs were scrapped. Yeah, and I would much rather have the Moog than the digital preset. That said, it's probably easier to score for the digital presets. So yeah, it gets into this wild area. That there's so much you can do with it, and the problem with it is the technology changes every few months. The technology is changing. I was talking to someone who had just come out with a book on electronic scoring, and they put it out like the week before MIDI 2.0 was announced, and the whole book was rendered useless. And so now Moog is in business again, and nearly every synth company has something with Moogy sounds. Yeah. You can hear the synths in Short Ride in a Fast Machine really clearly. The Chairman dances. Yeah. I need to listen to more Adams. Adams was one of those. I did not have an appreciation for John Adams until I got the chance to play the Grand Pianola music, which which problem is that, Ratchet? But yeah, so with the modern synths, it's so overwhelming. Oh wait, Ratchet, was it your teacher? It may have been you that was telling me that story. Yeah, it was you that was telling me that story. Never mind. So yeah, that um um so I think if you can ever get your hands on it, a really fantastic place to look for very subtle synthesizer scoring is to look at John Williams. John Williams will use synthesizers, and it's very interesting that nobody really talks about it, but like the very opening of Jurassic Park, that just like the title credits, there's synthesizer going, but it's way down in the bass. So there are things you can do with synthesizers that can't be done on any orchestral instrument. These massive throbbing sub-bass sounds or super high sounds that are above what the violins can do. I think it will only really happen with composers either learning how to communicate it efficiently in a score or working with a sound designer who can. I think it can be done now with today's variety. I think so. If the instruments could just settle down and be one thing, it would make things so much easier. I mean, if I go to write for a bassoon, I know that the bassoon's not going to change. The bassoon hasn't changed fundamentally since 1905. I mean, even then, I mean, I can go back and get a bassoon from 1870 and it'll sound just the same. Maybe, maybe not quite the same volume, better intonation now. This decade, I was able to put together a custom modular synthesizer with technology from different decades put together, and a laptop can create any imaginable synth sound. But the problem is it's any imaginable sound at that point. And this is what we can call the serial aisle problem. The serial aisle problem is something that's talked about in psychology. Basically, in a modern mega grocery store, the cereal aisle is the hardest for people to go down. And it's the hardest to go down because it has the most choices. And it is absolutely overwhelming, the number of choices. The more choices you have, the harder it becomes to make a decision. I am absolutely guilty of this. Last time I went down the cereal aisle, I bought generic Fruit Loops. Does fixed media count as an electronic instrument? No, but yes. And to answer your question, Ryan, Ondes Martineau drawing in the background? Absolutely. Before this, it's probably really hard to see unless you go like full screen. But I did a little Ondes Martineau doodle on the whiteboard behind me. Let's see if I can pull it forward just a little bit. Not one of my better art pieces. I don't work very well in dry erase ink, but on Martineau, you can see the speakers over here, the palm, the Metallique, the regular cabinet. Cantus Arcticus, God, I love Cantus Arcticus, and Cantus Arcticus has perhaps my favorite musical marking in it of any piece I have ever seen. The opening tempo mark is "Think of Autumn and Tchaikovsky." I just think that's absolutely lovely and charming and adorable. And so if you don't know, Cantus Arcticus is a piece by Rauchavara, and I'm not going to pronounce his first name because there's too many letters in it. It is for recorded Arctic birds and orchestra, and it is absolutely stunningly beautiful. And I love hearing all those birds in there. Being a birder, of course. So the recording plays alongside the orchestra. And, of course, Rauchavara is not the first person to do that. And I think we forget that the very first person to really do that is Ottorino Respighi in The Pines of Rome. We go back all the way to, what was Pines of Rome, like 1925 or so? 26? Anyway, Respighi finds a gramophone recording and has that play during The Pines of Rome, and it's calling out a nightingale. And so this is very early on. Gramophones were still pretty new technology, and he was taking it and incorporating that into his orchestral works. And we're so used to it, we don't think about how revolutionary that is. But he paves the way for fixed media to play. I have done the same thing. So in my Symphony 3, I have mixed media of bird songs. And I guess it's one of those things. Bird songs work really well for this. That play through two separate moments in my Symphony 3. So one is the birds call at night, and it's recorded as owls and nightjars. And then the other is the dawn chorus, where you hear all the birds waking up as you reach the summit of the mountain. I went to the MIM last year and tried out their Theremin, and then I saw the computerized band of instruments. Could there be a concert band version of that? Um, no. I'm trying to remember what you think. Machine driven. No. Because you can't. There, we have not been able to develop a machine embouchure that can control uh, the reed or the brass instrument. You could with flutes or recorders, but and that's that. I mean, with recorders, that's just a pipe organ. I definitely see field recording and found sound as electronic instruments. Okay, so this gets into an academic debate. Does it actually fit within the realm of it being an instrument? Um, it's a lot easier for a solenoid to hit a drum or piano string than vibrate lips. Yeah. Okay. So this gets into an academic debate: is where do we draw the line between what's an instrument and what's not? Is my CD player an instrument? And truth be told, I would have to say no. It is a device for playing back music, but it's not a device for creating music. And I think that's where the distinction has to lie. A recording is not a device to create music; it's just there to reproduce it. And so it's that creation aspect that, to me, makes it an instrument. Now, you may be able to argue differently on that. Is it an orchestration device? Absolutely, it's an orchestration device, but I don't think you can really talk about it being a full-fledged musical instrument. We're in a very gray area there. By the way, can we talk about the Mellotron? I'm trying to remember what the Mellotron is. It's that a synthesizer from the 80s. Why do I want to remember like the Mellotron being used by Mark Mothersbaugh? I think I've seen use a Mellotron. Um, I just had to get comfortable early on with having a shaky relationship to instrument, but for me it seems more like discipline. Possibly. I think it was always this: computers are not instruments, but they can make instruments. Rather, it's a medium for instruments to be played. Okay, yeah. I think it was called a Nickelodeon. They had two tenor saxophones and an accordion that worked. Um, yeah. My guess is the tenor saxes would only play a few notes. They wouldn't play everything. I mean, you wouldn't be able to do the full range. Yeah, okay, the Mellotron was a looping magnetic tape keyboard. Okay, yeah, used by the Beatles. Mellotron. Sounds like you hybridize Optimus Prime and a mellophone. Yeah, you're right. But yeah, I'm trying to remember. I've seen stuff on the Mellotron. Um, I from what I understand, it worked okay, but it wasn't great. I don't want to go too far with things and say I play dozens of instruments, though. If you look at them separately, it's true. Um, yeah, I mean, again, Sweeter, it gets into really a semantics point of view. I would call an iwi a electronic instrument. Absolutely. But I can't call my computer an electronic instrument. I don't know what either of those are. Croix Sonore or Seaboard Grand. I don't know what those are. That's so. Once we get outside of the realm of orchestral instruments, I think you guys are starting to notice that my knowledge goes off very steeply. Um, I am very much at the bottom of the Dunning Kruger loop. I know enough to know that I don't know. But again, this electronic instruments develop so quickly, though it is impossible to keep track of them, and so many of them are proprietary brands that, again, from a composer's standpoint, I don't know if um, I can write for these instruments because they change so often. And players are recycling their instruments so often that it it has never become fixed. It's never become standardized, and it's difficult to work with. Whereas other instruments like the theremin or the Ondes Martineau, helicopter. If there was a question I skipped, it very well could be that I did not know, or I just missed it because the with the time delay and a bunch of people asking, I may have just missed it. Go ahead and ask the question again, and I will try and answer it if I'm able to. Seaboard's nice. There are a few other extra expensive controllers out there on the market now. Polyphonic aftertouch and horizontal movement. So with a lot of these instruments you guys are talking about, I see them being used more for electronic performers, people who are wanting to control everything from one station. So much more in the vein of pop music. And as a classical composer, I have a harder time grasping that kind of stuff because they're not really designed for the concert hall. Could they be used for a concert hall? Sure. It's just, to me, it's so overwhelming. There's so many things out there, and it's like, okay, I just want to write for the Ondes Martineau. And actually, that is something that I would love to be able to write for, but it's one of those instruments I don't know if I ever will be able to write for it. So I want to talk a little bit more about scoring and less about the instruments. So I want to talk a little bit about what could these instruments bring to a wind band. And last week, one of the things I said is that the wind band does not have an instrument capable of producing a very soft, very high sound like the violin section can do. But if you add a synthesizer or an Ondes Martineau or a theremin along those lines, you could very easily add that sound into a wind ensemble. Okay, here's Helicopter's question. If someone were to record a note on an acoustic instrument and then crop it to only a single waveform seamlessly, would that make it halfway to being synth? Um, uh, I don't think so. By the strict definition of what a synthesizer is, um, I think that the synthesizer needs to be producing the sounds um, itself instead of working from a pre-recorded sound. The pre-recorded sound would be is something you could program into a synth, and it's such a gray area, Helicopter. I don't know if there's an answer. I mean, what you're doing there is much more along the lines of music concrete. Um, we're seeing now a lot of technology entering jazz in a way that feels more lasting than 80s electronic fusion fad, and it gets more as it gets more established, it will be more accessible to concert composers. Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. I A lot of synthesizers use ROM recorded waveforms and then modify the sound or blend it with others. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. Pre-recorded sounds are samplers, not synths. Yeah. So there's the answer I was looking for, and I knew it was in there. But a synth can have a sampler in it, and yeah. So, but anyway, back to scoring ideas. You know, I've proposed the idea of using it for that extra high octave that the wind band really does not possess, and then again, it can also help out with extra low octave. If you don't have Jared's octocontra clarinet or Richard's subcontra bassoon, and you want that bottom low note, actually, I'm gonna track that back a little bit, because one of the issues with doing the extra low notes in there is you do run into the issue that the modern speaker technology cannot reproduce some of the very lowest tones that we can get from acoustic instruments, which is one reason I always feel acoustic instruments are by and large superior. They can do things effortlessly that take a lot of effort from the electronic instruments. So if you listen to a recording of a big pipe organ and you play it back through big speakers, you're still not going to get the very lowest sounds of the lowest pipes that you would get if you're in the same room with it, because those tones just don't transmit through the speakers. And that's just a limit with technology. It's easy to score for, too. Assume you want a very simple waveform without many, if any, harmonics. Yeah. So I'm curious for Ratchet or Sweeter, who have a lot more experience with this than I do. What kind of synthesizer or settings would you guys be using in, say, in a concert wind band setting? I mean, would you have some presets you'd use? Would you be programming in each of the sounds? Yeah, I'd be curious on that. An analog synthesizer into 12 to 15 inch speakers can get pretty massive. It depends on what you want to blend with. Yeah, and that's true. Or if you don't want it to blend at all, you want it to kind of be its own sound. Brass, something saw wavy. Yeah, I would agree there. Um, Clarinets would be much more sine wave. Ryan, we'll probably end in the next 15 minutes or so. Yeah, and you know, if you were just scoring synthesizer, sine wave, square wave, sawtooth wave, I think that, I mean, something along those lines. Maybe you treat it like organ, where you say, I want flutes playing this, or I want the diapasons playing this. Also, a lot of finding sounds in FM8 or Contact or wherever, poking around until you find a timbre you like. I tend to think about smaller ensembles in general, but there's a whole array of timbre. It's just being able to communicate it for the composer. It's honestly a lot of, I like this with this. Yeah, and it's so many. This is like scoring for organ, where every instrument is different, and there are so many options that sometimes I do think that organ that synthesizers should probably be scored best by someone who specializes in that area. Just like organ registration. I think John Adams does something similar to organ stops. He makes the synths and then sells them with the scores. Interesting. That would be one thing to do. I mean, that's almost closer to a Hans Zimmer approach. I use a lot of different synth technology from different eras. It would be entirely different depending on the piece. Yeah, and so as the performer, you've got that variability. For me as the composer, it's like, oh crap, where do I begin? It's like, again, it's back to the cereal aisle. There's too many choices. I don't know where to begin. He'll say, okay, I want this synth here. Which percent? Yeah. Tape recorder. Yes, we've talked, tape recorder or just general playback. Yeah, we've talked about that, Ryan. Talked about it through Rachevara's Cantus Arcticus or Respighi's Pines of Rome, my own Symphony 3. Yeah, it synthesizer technology for a composer, to me, is just utterly overwhelming. I should at some point do a deep dive on it. In fact, I've got a local friend who is a synth player and composer. Maybe I'll reach out to her and just pick her brain on it. Composers who don't specialize in it can use a lot of different language to communicate their wishes. And today, example recordings can be made available. Yeah, and that kind of stuff would definitely be a bonus. And maybe I'm also thinking from the print music side of things, because to me, everything needs to be expressed in print, which a lot of people have some issue with, but for hundreds of years, that was our our only method of conveying what the composer meant to the performer. And how to notate that. At the risk of being demonized, the Germans around the 30s were the first to record sounds onto magnetic tape. I mean, hey, that's who did it. That's who did it. I mean, that's... Yeah, so I think one of my hesitations with all the synthesizer stuff is I don't own an electric keyboard. I mean, the keyboard I have is this 100-year-old pipe organ or reed organ behind me, and it's it's fixed. It's not going to change. Whereas I could plug in new software into a synthesizer nowadays, and that can change greatly. I made a video where I took a bass clarinet, used amplitude modulation of the same frequency to push the harmonics up, and mixed them together. It sounded almost like a baritone saxophone. That does not surprise me one bit. I mean, the difference between a bass clarinet and a baritone saxophone is just it really is the presence of the even harmonics in the baritone sax that the bass clarinet doesn't have, or it has them to a very, very minimal degree, such that you don't hear them. But anyway, yeah, electronics are to me a baffling area. Yeah, most composers probably have a MIDI keyboard now, and there are some user-friendly software synths. Except me, I don't have a MIDI keyboard. I mean, okay, there is one back in a closet that stopped working like 10 years ago. In it, so I do not have a MIDI keyboard at all. Mari Kimura has done stuff like that too. Oh yeah. So yeah, as I was saying though, Ratchet. No, we're not going to talk waveforms because that stuff gets into the physics realm and it gets over my head, and I think that we're kind of at our natural stopping point for tonight. So long story short, there's about 3 instruments that can be effectively used that are true electronic instruments: the Theremin, the Ondes Martonots, and the modern synthesizer. Of those, the modern synthesizer is, of course, the most widely available. The Theremin is the hardest to use, and the Ondes Martineau probably has the most potential as a true musical instrument. Scientific waveforms have just different percentages of different harmonics. Yeah, that's all it is. Moog style synths use them through filters to remove some harmonics over time. Yeah, and that's a very simple way of distilling all that information. It's just through all the different filters you can put on. And I'd love to have a genuine Moog synthesizer to be able to play with it. Maybe it's one of those that if I get good enough at it, I'd start incorporating it into some of my works. I mean, it's one of those. The more I think about it, the more I'm like, man, I could do something like this. I could write a piece that has synthesizer part in it. Yeah, I may actually shoot a message to my friend who's a well-known local synth player and see, maybe pick her brain. I know she wants to pick a bassoonist's brain at some point, so maybe we can work something out. Anyway, all right, guys. Is this the second last live stream of the decade? Well, let's see. Next week is the 26th, so yeah, we'll do one next week. And I have a feeling my friend Michael will be able to come next week so we can talk guitars. Yeah, because I know he has company at his place now, but should be free, and fingers crossed we can do guitars next week with my friend Michael. Okay, so if there are no more questions tonight, oh man, there's so many things going on. There's also a waveform that is just like a triangle, except it has all semi-sine. There's a cosine and others too, but uncommon in synths. Yeah, okay. So yeah, now that we're getting into the physics of waveform, this is an area where I have to kind of back out and say, all right, you guys, go play. This is an area where it's like, oh, I don't know nearly enough to talk about any of this. This is not stuff that's taught in composition school. So, all right, guys. So, Yeah. Thanks, guys, for joining me tonight. I know this one not nearly as expert rambling as normal, but I think through Sweeter and through Ratchet and through Helicopter and some other people chiming in, it's fun. There's a it is a big world and one that I am not nearly familiar enough with. So anyway, until next week, guys, and go see the Star Wars that's coming out tonight. All right, talk to you later.